This is purely a journalistic point of view. Nothing more has been said in this video other than that of which has been reported by various media sources and backed up with sources seen at the end of this video.
The Royal Rumble has become a fixture in the WWE, as seen every year, and with this month the WWE holding its greatest Royal Rumble in Saudi Arabia to promote the company's foray into a new market. The Rumble is unquestionably one of the WWE's top attractions, and the addition of a Rumble featuring female competitors suggests the show is here to stay. However, you might be surprised by the origins of the Battle Royal, the dismal failure of the first Royal Rumble, and the reason the Royal Rumble was created. Join us now as Behind the Titantron examines the true story of the Royal Rumble. In order to understand the Royal Rumble, one must understand the history of the Battle Royal. The Battle Royal dates back hundreds of years, with some claiming its origins go back to the Middle Ages. The Battle Royal as we know it began to take shape in 18th century England, when a group of boxers competed in a winner-take-all competition. The rules of boxing were much different then, with boxers allowed to use wrestling holds as well as gouges and other moves banned today. As the English emigrated to America, they brought the tradition of the Battle Royal with them. Unfortunately, it was typically used by slave owners to pit slaves against one another, an example of efforts to suppress slave rebellions. Sometimes, contestants were given 10-pound bags of cotton to strike their opponents with, while they competed in a circle made in the ground. After the American Civil War, boxing battle royals continued with African Americans pitted against one another for the entertainment of white spectators. Over time, these boxing battle royals were banned, first in the northern states, then in the south. However, wrestling promoters saw their appeal and took the concept for their own. Like many firsts in wrestling, the date of the first battle royal is impossible to pin down. It is believed it began in the 1930s, but unlike boxing battle royals, the wrestling versions were main event matches, a tradition seen over the next 5 decades. Battle royals often had special kayfabe prizes, with the winner receiving a cash bonus or a car, making the stakes seem higher as no title was typically up for grabs. Starting in 1967, promoter Roy Shira's San Francisco territory had an annual event known as the Cow Palace Battle Royal. As Jim Ross recalled in 2015, one of the things that San Francisco wrestling was known for was its annual Battle Royal, which became an eagerly anticipated event for wrestling fans every January. It started as a modestly attended event in the Cow Palace on November 11, 1967, but by 1969, the annual Battle Royal was selling out the famous facility, packing it with 16,000 plus fans, and oftentimes turning hundreds of others away. Much like the Super Bowl, which took until Super Bowl III to formally establish itself, it also took 3 years for the annual Battle Royal concept to become established as a must-see attraction. The Cow Palace Battle Royal continued until 1981, when the promotion folded. By 1985, it was clear the top 2 promotions in the United States were the WWF and Jim Crockett Promotions. Like many wrestling promotions, the Battle Royal was seen as a special attraction to help boost ticket sales. Booker Dusty Rhodes created the Bunkhouse Stampede, a variant of the classic Battle Royal in which a multitude of wrestlers, often anywhere from 20 to 30 of them, assembled in the ring, then proceeded to try and eliminate each other by throwing them over the top rope. JCP prided itself in its in-ring product, believing that their brand of wrestling was more traditional and less flashy than the WWF was. Thus, they made their Bunkhouse Battle Royal, where wrestlers competed in street clothes and were encouraged to bring weapons with them. Dusty hoped that this would attract fans who disliked the cartoonish WWF product and who were looking for a more physical and technical style. The first series of Bunkhouse Stampedes began in 1985, with a series of them held around Crockett's territory. The winner of each match then proceeded to a final Bunkhouse Stampede, with the winner getting a bronze cowboy boot. Dusty Rhodes went on to win the first Bunkhouse Stampede, helping to support his claim that he was the bull of the woods and causing more than one wrestler to wonder whether Dusty as a booker was also stroking his ego. In 1986, the Bunkhouse Stampede returned with a slight change in the rules for determining a winner and the addition of kayfabe cash prizes for the winners. This time, the winner would be decided by whoever won the most Bunkhouse Stampedes. Once again, the Dream got the bronze boot, confirming Rhodes saw himself as the top babyface in the company, thus the need for going over again. The first Royal Rumble was designed as the WWF's second FU to Jim Crockett Promotions. Just months earlier, the WWF had sandbagged Crockett by airing its new pay-per-view The Survivor Series against Crockett's flagship show Starrcade 87. For those unfamiliar with the story, the WWF rode the pay-per-view success of 1987's WrestleMania 3 by telling pay-per-view providers that they could air their new pay-per-view Survivor Series on Thanksgiving night instead of Starrcade. The WWF, being the generous people that they were, told pay-per-view providers that they could choose whichever show they wanted, but if they wanted to air WrestleMania 4, they had to pick that year's Survivor Series. Given the monster business of WrestleMania 3, most companies went with the Survivor Series. While a few cable companies didn't care for Vince McMahon's strong-arm tactics, there weren't enough companies that carried Starrcade to make it a financial success. In the end, the loss of revenues for Starrcade put the WWF's arch-rival in a precarious situation. Hoping to make up for its losses with Starrcade 87, Crockett developed a pay-per-view centered around the Bunkhouse Stampede. This time, the series returned to its policy of holding multiple stampedes, with the winner of each proceeding to a final event, the aforementioned pay-per-view. There was also a special wildcard qualifier, which ended with Dusty Rhodes earning the last spot in the finals. In an interesting twist, the Bunkhouse Stampede final was held in a steel cage. Unlike traditional battle royals, the only way to defeat your opponent was to throw them over the cage or through the cage door. Cage matches have traditionally been seen as a special attraction for wrestling fans, so perhaps JCP felt a cage match battle royal combo would be irresistible. Unfortunately for Crockett, the WWF wasn't going to make things easy. By 1988, the WWF was doing fantastic business and expanding its brand to network television. Vince McMahon's business relationship with NBC executive Dick Ebersol resulted in the fantastic success of NBC's late night special, Saturday Night's Main Event. Now McMahon wanted to air a special on the USA Network, the same cable station that aired Tuesday Night Titans. The fact that said special would air the same night as Jim Crockett Promotions pay-per-view was coincidence, or so he would claim. Pat Patterson, who had competed in the Cow Palace Battle Royals and was now helping Vince McMahon with booking, recalls pitching the idea of the Royal Rumble to Vince McMahon. The difference between WWE's Royal Rumble and a traditional over-the-top Battle Royal is that the participants come into the match at 2-minute intervals, not all at the same time at the beginning of the match. I wanted to create something special, something like we had in San Francisco where it had been such a hot event. The more I kept running the idea over in my mind, the more it took shape, and I was sure I was onto something, so I finally brought the idea to Vince. He laughed at the concept at first, saying that an hour was way too long to keep fans interested. Having worked with McMahon for years, Patterson knew Vince could change his mind on the idea after he thought about it. Patterson recalls meeting with the USA Network to discuss a 3-hour wrestling special for the cable network. Dick Ebersol, who produced NBC's Saturday Night's Main Event, was there, as he would produce this show also. Everyone was looking for something to make the event as a must-see show at Survivor Series or WrestleMania. It was then when Vince McMahon said, "Pat, tell Dick about your stupid idea for that Battle Royal." According to Patterson, Ebersol loved the concept right away. He immediately imagined the drama of the clock ticking down on screen and the audience's anxious anticipation of who was going to enter the ring next being played out every 2 minutes. While most fans remember the first Royal Rumble airing on the USA Network, there was one beforehand. Interestingly enough, the WWF toyed with the Rumble concept on 4th October 1987 when it held a Battle Royal titled the Royal Rumble in St. Louis, Missouri. This particular event featured an array of WWF superstars competing to earn a WWF Championship match. The event was a complete dud, with only 1,976 fans on hand to watch the one-man gang win the event by eliminating the Junkyard Dog. The 1987 Rumble has become a footnote in history, with the first Rumble usually being listed as the one that aired on the USA Network on January 24, 1988. The question becomes, when did the WWF come up with the concept of airing the Royal Rumble opposite Crockett's pay-per-view? Was the 1987 Rumble a test run for the 1988 show, or was it an attempt to test a new concept, similar to how the WWF held the King of the Ring tournaments at house shows before transforming them into pay-per-views? Pat Patterson doesn't discuss this in his book, and avoids the issue of whether the 1988 Royal Rumble was an attempt to sabotage another Crockett show. All but the most hardcore WWF apologists would argue it was a coincidence that led to the Rumble airing for free opposite the Bunkhouse Stampede. Like Survivor Series, the Royal Rumble seems it was custom made to hurt Jim Crockett Promotions' pay-per-view revenue. Crockett would have hoped fans were willing to shell out cash for its pay-per-view when they could watch a free WWF event that was somewhere between Saturday night's main event and a pay-per-view. The Rumble was not a star-studded event from start to finish, but it had a lot to offer, and it was free. Ultimately, Jim Crockett Promotions did nothing to help the Bunkhouse Stampede succeed. Just as it had done with Starrcade, the event was held in a non-traditional market. Starrcade 87 had been held in Chicago, while the Stampede was being held in WWF's backyard of Long Island. While Jim Crockett Promotions was trying to establish itself as a national wrestling company, its decision to stage pay-per-view shows outside its traditional southern markets backfired. The Stampede's ticket sales were terrible, with only 6,000 people showing up. Those that did show up likely missed a large part of the show, as tickets stated the show started at 7 PM when it actually began at 6:35 PM. Fans tuning in on its pay-per-view were misinformed as well, with the show listed as starting at 7 PM. The match featured some of Crockett's top stars, many of them which were known for their ability to brawl. The match participants were the wildcard entrant Dusty Rhodes, along with Arn Anderson, Lex Luger, the Barbarian, Road Warrior Animal, Tully Blanchard, and the Warlord. The match featured lots of brawling and a good amount of blood. It really had all the makings of a true battle royal. The problem was that the rule that people had to be ejected over or through the cage was just too hard to pull off. In order to knock your opponent over the cage, you would have to drag them up to the cage and beat them bad enough where you might throw them over the cage eventually. Anyone who took their opponent to the top was putting themselves at risk for elimination. It just didn't seem realistic. While ejecting an opponent through the cage door sounded plausible, it wasn't so good in execution. The Bunkhouse Stampede proved to be a disappointing show for fans and a disappointing investment for Jim Crockett Promotions. The Royal Rumble by comparison proved to be a spectacular victory, with the show boasting an 8.1 rating, something unheard of for professional wrestling in the modern era. The Royal Rumble jumped to pay-per-view the following year, quickly becoming one of the most eagerly awaited events in the WWE. Well guys, this wraps up this episode of Behind the Titantron. Be sure to vote for the next episode in the poll in the top right corner. As always, hit that like button if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.